When I first met Emily, I thought I had struck gold. She was the perfect blend of beauty, intelligence, and wit. And from the moment we locked eyes at that college party, I was smitten. I was a junior at the time, studying business administration, and she was a sophomore majoring in psychology. Our connection was instantaneous and electric, a spark that quickly grew into a roaring flame. We got married right after she graduated. It was a small, intimate ceremony with just close friends and family. I remember the way her eyes sparkled as she walked down the aisle, the way her smile seemed to light up the room. I was the happiest man alive, convinced that our love was unbreakable. Life was good. I landed a job at a marketing firm, working my way up from the ground floor. Emily decided to pursue her master's degree while working part-time as a counselor at a local clinic. We bought a cozy little house in the suburbs, complete with a white picket fence and a Labrador named Max. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but for the most part, our life together was blissfully ordinary. It wasn't until I was promoted to a managerial position that things started to shift. My new role came with longer hours and more responsibilities, but it also meant a significant pay raise. Emily was supportive, at least at first. She encouraged me to chase my career goals, assured me that she understood the sacrifices we had to make. But as the months turned into years, I could sense a growing distance between us. We still talked and laughed, but there was a certain disconnect that hadn't been there before. I chalked it up to the stress of work and school, convinced that it was just a rough patch that we would eventually overcome. Then came the late nights. My boss, Robert, a tall, charismatic man with a booming voice and an infectious laugh, started inviting me to after-hours meetings and business dinners. He was the kind of guy everyone wanted to be around, the life of the party, and I felt privileged to be taken under his wing. Emily, on the other hand, began to express her frustration with my absences. "You're never home anymore, Jack," she would say, her voice tinged with sadness and resentment. "I miss you." "I know, babe," I'd reply, feeling a pang of guilt. "But this is important for my career. Just a little longer, and things will get better, I promise." It was around this time that I noticed Emily spending more time with her friends, particularly with Sarah, her best friend since college. They'd go out for drinks, have girls' nights in, and I was grateful that she had someone to lean on when I couldn't be there. But there were other signs, subtle ones that I dismissed as paranoia. Emily's phone was always on silent, and she seemed more guarded about her messages and social media. She started dressing up more, even on days when she had no plans. And there was a new perfume, one that lingered in the air long after she left the room. I pushed these thoughts to the back of my mind, focusing on my work and trusting that our bond was strong enough to weather any storm. Little did I know the tempest was already brewing, and it would soon tear my world apart. It all began to unravel one fateful evening when I came home earlier than usual. The house was unusually quiet, and as I made my way to the kitchen, I found Emily's phone on the counter, unlocked. A message from Robert flashed on the screen, and before I could stop myself, I read it. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. R." My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled through their conversation. The truth was laid bare in front of me, each word a dagger to my heart. The woman I loved, the woman I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with, was having an affair with my boss. In that moment, everything changed. The foundation of my life crumbled beneath my feet, leaving me in a freefall of disbelief and anger. The betrayal cut deep, and I knew that there was no going back. This was just the beginning of a journey that would test every ounce of my strength and resolve. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind reeling with questions, I prepared myself for the storm that was about to come. Little did I know, the revelations that followed would be even more devastating, leading me down a path of confrontation, revenge, and ultimately, a quest for closure and healing. The day started off like any other. I had an important meeting with a potential client that afternoon, and I was nervously rehearsing my pitch in the car. Emily had already left for her job at the clinic, and I had kissed her goodbye, trying to push aside the lingering doubts and suspicions that had been gnawing at me since I saw those messages. By lunchtime, my nerves had settled, and I felt confident. I was ready to knock this presentation out of the park and impress Robert once again. My phone buzzed with a reminder for the meeting, and I realized I had forgotten some crucial documents at home. With a sigh, I decided to swing by the house to pick them up before heading to the office. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Emily's car parked a few blocks away. My heart skipped a beat. Why was she home? And why had she parked so far from the house? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. I decided to head straight to the office instead. The usual hustle and bustle greeted me as I entered the building, but something felt off. I made my way to my office, passing by Robert's door, which was slightly ajar. I could hear muffled voices and soft laughter, and my curiosity got the better of me. I paused, listening intently. "Are you sure we won't get caught?" I heard a familiar female voice say, a voice that sent a chill down my spine. It was Emily. "Don't worry, everyone's at lunch or in meetings," Robert replied, his voice low and reassuring. "Besides, you're worth the risk." My blood ran cold. I pushed the door open a fraction more, peeking through the gap. My worst fears were confirmed. There, on Robert's desk, was Emily, half-dressed and locked in a passionate embrace with my boss. The sight of them together, their bodies intertwined, was like a punch to the gut. I felt a surge of rage and betrayal that threatened to consume me. For a moment I was frozen in place, unable to process the scene before me. The woman I had loved and trusted, the woman I had built my life with, was here, in the arms of the man who was supposed to be my mentor and friend. The sheer audacity of their betrayal was staggering. But then, something snapped inside me. I stormed into the office, the door crashing against the wall with a loud bang. Emily and Robert sprang apart, their faces a mix of shock and horror. "What the hell is going on here?" I bellowed, my voice echoing through the room. Emily scrambled to cover herself, her eyes wide with fear and guilt. Robert stood up, adjusting his clothes, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a look of panic. "Jack, I can explain," he stammered, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "This isn't what it looks like." "Don't you dare lie to me!" I shouted, my hands clenched into fists. "I saw the messages, Robert. I know everything." Emily started to cry, her tears streaming down her face as she tried to speak. "Jack, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off, my voice trembling with rage. "How you've been sneaking around behind my back, how you've been sleeping with my boss." She sobbed, unable to meet my eyes. The sight of her tears did nothing to quell my anger. In fact, it only fueled it further. I turned my attention back to Robert, who was now standing behind his desk, looking like a cornered animal. "You son of a bitch!" I growled, taking a step towards him. "How could you do this to me? I trusted you." "Jack, listen, it was a mistake," Robert said, his voice shaking. "It just happened. We didn't mean for it to go this far." "A mistake?" I echoed, incredulous. "This is more than a mistake, Robert. This is a betrayal of the worst kind." I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, my vision narrowing as the red mist of fury descended. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to tear him apart, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he had caused me. But even as I lunged at him, a part of me knew that violence wasn't the answer. "Get out," I spat, my voice low and deadly. "Both of you. Get out of my sight." Emily sobbed harder, grabbing her clothes and rushing past me, her head down in shame. Robert hesitated, as if considering his options, but then he too made a hasty exit, leaving me alone in the office. I sank into a chair, my hands trembling with the aftermath of my rage. The room was silent now, save for the sound of my ragged breathing. The weight of what I had just witnessed settled heavily on my shoulders, and for the first time since I discovered the truth, I felt the full impact of my wife's infidelity. The love and trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship were now shattered, replaced by a gaping chasm of betrayal and hurt. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had pledged my life to, had been unfaithful in the most egregious way possible. And as I sat there, alone and devastated, I knew that this was only the beginning. The confrontation with Emily, the fallout from this revelation, and the path to whatever came next, all of it loomed ahead, dark and uncertain. The drive home was a blur. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, rage, heartbreak, disbelief. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, their betrayal seared into my memory. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over our little house. Emily's car was already there. She must have driven straight home after fleeing Robert's office. The thought of her waiting inside, probably rehearsing some pathetic excuse, made my blood boil. I slammed the car door shut and marched up the walkway, my heart pounding in my chest. The front door creaked open, and there she was, standing in the foyer, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me, her face a mask of guilt and fear. "Jack," she started, her voice trembling. "Please, let me explain." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me with a deliberate calmness that belied the storm raging within me. "Explain? You want to explain?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I think the situation was pretty clear." "Jack, it wasn't what you think," she pleaded, taking a step towards me. "It just happened. I never meant to hurt you." "Never meant to hurt me," I scoffed, shaking my head. "Emily, you were sleeping with my boss. How the hell do you think that wouldn't hurt me?" She flinched at the harshness of my words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. It was a terrible mistake. But I love you, Jack. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I echoed, incredulous. "Do you hear yourself? You betrayed me, Emily. You betrayed our marriage." She broke down then, her sobs racking her body as she crumpled to the floor. I watched her, my heart a twisted knot of anger and pain. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to take away her pain. But the other part, the part that was winning, wanted her to suffer, to feel the depth of the betrayal she had inflicted on me. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why him? Why Robert?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. "It started when you began working those long hours," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were never home, and I felt so alone. Robert, he was there. He listened. He made me feel wanted." Her words cut through me like a knife. I had been working hard, yes, but I thought I was doing it for us, for our future. To hear that my dedication had driven her into another man's arms was a bitter pill to swallow. "So it's my fault?" I asked, bitterness creeping into my voice. "I worked hard to provide for us, and you repay me by sleeping with my boss?" "No, Jack, that's not what I meant," she said quickly, her eyes wide with desperation. "It was never your fault. It was mine. I was weak, and I let myself be tempted. I lost sight of what mattered." "And what matters, Emily?" I demanded, taking a step closer. "What mattered so much that you threw away our marriage for a few stolen moments with Robert?" She looked down, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "You," she whispered, "you and our life together. I know I messed up, Jack. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you. Please, don't leave me." The anger that had fueled me since I walked into that office began to wane, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. I felt like I had been running a marathon, only to find myself back at the starting line, exhausted and no closer to a resolution. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily," I said quietly, the weight of my words settling heavily between us. "You broke something inside me, something I don't know if I can ever fix." She looked up at me, her eyes full of anguish. "I love you, Jack," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I love you more than anything. Please, just give me a chance to make this right." I stood there, torn between the love I still felt for her and the searing pain of her betrayal. How do you move past something like this? How do you rebuild trust that has been shattered so completely? "Why should I?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Give me one good reason why I should believe anything you say." She took a deep breath, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Because I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job. I'll do anything, Jack. Just please don't give up on us." Her words hung in the air, a desperate plea for forgiveness and a second chance. I looked at her, the woman I had once believed was my soulmate, and I saw a broken person, just as shattered as I was. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with pain and doubt, but maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. "I need time, Emily," I said finally, the anger and heartbreak giving way to a weary resignation. "I need time to think, to figure out if this is something we can come back from." She nodded, her eyes filled with a flicker of hope. "Take all the time you need," she said softly. "I'll be here, waiting, and I'll spend every day proving to you that I'm worth it." With that, I turned and walked upstairs, each step feeling like a mile. I needed space, needed to clear my head and decide what the next steps were. The confrontation was over, but the battle for my heart and mind had just begun. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I knew that whatever came next would define the rest of my life, and I was determined to face it head on, no matter how painful it might be. The next few days were a haze of anger, sadness, and introspection. I took a few days off from work, unable to face Robert and the reality of the situation. Emily and I barely spoke, living like strangers under the same roof. The silence was deafening, each moment a painful reminder of the betrayal that had upended my life. During those sleepless nights, my mind wandered to dark places. Thoughts of revenge simmered just beneath the surface, each one more vengeful than the last. I wanted Robert to pay for what he had done, to feel the same pain and humiliation he had inflicted on me. And I wanted Emily to see just how deeply she had hurt me, to understand the gravity of her actions. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, an idea began to take shape. It was risky and dangerous, but the thought of it brought a twisted sense of satisfaction. If Robert wanted to play dirty, then so would I. The next morning, I put my plan into action. I gathered every piece of evidence I had, screenshots of the messages, a recording of their conversation in his office, and any other incriminating details I could find. With a steely resolve, I called an old friend of mine, Marcus, who worked in IT and had a knack for hacking into systems. "Hey, Marcus, it's Jack," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need a favor." "Sure thing, man. What's up?" he replied, his tone friendly and curious. "I need you to help me hack into someone's email and phone records," I said bluntly. "I need to gather as much dirt on them as possible." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Jack, are you sure about this? This sounds serious." "It is serious," I said, my voice hardening. "My wife has been cheating on me with my boss, and I want to make sure he pays for it." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Damn, Jack, I'm really sorry to hear that. Okay, I'll help you. Just send me the details and I'll get to work." I hung up the phone, a sense of grim determination settling over me. This was just the beginning. I was going to expose Robert for the sleazebag he was, and I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. Over the next few days, Marcus worked his magic. He hacked into Robert's email and phone records, uncovering a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. There were messages to other women, shady business deals, and even some borderline illegal activities. It was more than enough to ruin his career and his reputation. With the evidence in hand, I made my next move. I scheduled a meeting with the head of HR, a stern but fair woman named Lisa. I laid everything out on the table, showing her the messages, recordings, and other damning evidence. "Jack, this is unbelievable," Lisa said, her eyes wide with shock. "I had no idea Robert was involved in any of this." "Believe it," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "And if you don't take action, I will. I'll go to the board, the media, anyone who will listen. This needs to be dealt with." Lisa nodded, her expression grim. "You're right. This can't go unpunished. I'll start an investigation immediately." Satisfied that Robert's downfall was in motion, I turned my attention to Emily. She had to understand the magnitude of her betrayal, and I had to make sure she felt the weight of her actions. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. She looked up at me, a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. "Jack, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, sitting down across from her. "What is there to talk about, Emily? You cheated on me with my boss. You destroyed our marriage." She wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I've been trying to figure out why I did it, why I let myself get so lost. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it." "Good," I said, my voice icy. "You should hate yourself. But that's not enough. You need to understand just how deeply you've hurt me, how much you've shattered my trust." She looked down, her hands trembling. "I do understand, Jack. I do. And I'll do anything to make it right, to prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. The woman I fell in love with would never have done this. You let yourself be seduced by Robert, and now you have to live with the consequences. I stood up, pacing the room as I spoke. "I've already taken steps to make sure Robert pays for what he's done. He's going to lose his job, his reputation, everything. And you, Emily, you need to decide what you want to do. Because right now, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. She sobbed, her body shaking with the force of her emotions. I want to make it right, Jack. I want to earn back your trust. Please give me a chance. I stopped pacing, looking at her with a mixture of anger and sorrow. We'll see, Emily. But right now, I need time. I need space to figure out if this is something I can move past. With that, I walked out of the room, leaving her to her tears. The path to revenge was a dark one, but it was the only way I knew to cope with the overwhelming pain and betrayal. And as I lay in bed that night, I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was determined to see it through. Weeks passed, each day a struggle to keep my emotions in check. The fallout from Robert's exposure was swift and brutal. He was fired, and his reputation was in tatters. News of his indiscretions spread like wildfire, and I took a grim satisfaction in knowing he was getting what he deserved. Emily, on the other hand, remained a constant presence, her efforts to win back my trust both earnest and exhausting. I knew the time had come to have the conversation I had been dreading. We couldn't continue to live in this limbo, pretending that things might somehow return to normal. I needed closure, and we both needed to decide what the future held for us, whether it meant trying to rebuild or going our separate ways. One evening, after yet another silent dinner, I asked Emily to join me in the living room. She sat down, her eyes searching mine for any sign of hope. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation that would determine the course of our lives. Emily, I began, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. We need to talk about our future, about what happens next. She nodded, tears already welling up in her eyes. I know, Jack. I've been dreading this, but I know we can't avoid it forever. I looked at her, seeing the woman I had loved for so many years, and yet feeling the immense distance that now separated us. I've been thinking a lot about us, about what happened, and about whether or not we can move past it. And the truth is, I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again. Her tears began to fall, but she didn't look away. I understand, Jack. I've been trying so hard to show you that I'm committed to making things right, but I know it might not be enough. It's not just about the effort, Emily, I said, my voice softening. It's about the fundamental breach of trust. You were unfaithful, and that kind of wound doesn't heal easily. Every time I look at you, I see you with him. I hear his words, I see those messages, and it tears me apart. She sobbed quietly, her hands trembling in her lap. I'm so sorry, Jack. I wish I could take it all back. But I can't. All I can do is try to be better, to prove to you that I'm still the woman you married. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. That's the thing, Emily. I don't know if the woman I married is still there. You've changed, and so have I. This whole ordeal has changed us both in ways we can't undo. There was a long silence, the weight of our shared history hanging heavily between us. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you saying you want a divorce? The word hung in the air, sharp and painful. I took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of what I was about to say. Yes, Emily. I think that's what we need. We need to let each other go, to find a way to move forward separately. I don't see how we can rebuild what we've lost. She nodded slowly, her face crumpling with the weight of her grief. I understand, Jack. I don't want to lose you, but I don't want to keep hurting you either. If divorce is what you need, then I won't fight it. A mixture of relief and sadness washed over me. This was the right decision, but it was far from easy. We can do this amicably, I said gently. We can split our assets fairly, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. We don't have to make this any harder than it already is. Emily nodded again, wiping her tears. Thank you, Jack. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I appreciate it. I want you to be happy, even if it means letting you go. The rest of the conversation was a blur of logistics and practicalities, discussing lawyers and timelines. But the emotional impact lingered long after the details were settled. As we prepared to go our separate ways, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and liberation. Our marriage was ending, but maybe, just maybe, we could both find a way to heal and move forward. That night, as I lay in bed, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Emily and I were done. The life we had built together was over, and a new chapter was beginning. It was a terrifying and uncertain future, but it was also a chance for a fresh start, free from the shadows of betrayal and hurt. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to face it head on, determined to find happiness and peace in whatever form it might come. The days following our decision to divorce were filled with a mixture of relief and heartache. Emily and I had reached a mutual understanding, but the process of disentangling our lives was far from simple. We divided our assets as fairly as we could, each of us trying to maintain a semblance of civility despite the underlying tension. Our home, the place where we had shared so many memories, was one of the hardest decisions to make. Ultimately, we decided to sell it. Neither of us could bear to stay in a place that held so many reminders of both our happiest moments and our deepest betrayals. The house went on the market, and we began the arduous task of packing up our lives. Emily moved in with Sarah for the time being, and I rented a small apartment across town. The transition was jarring, the silence in my new place almost oppressive, but it also provided a sense of solace, a chance to start over without the constant reminders of what had been lost. Throughout the process, we communicated through our lawyers, keeping interactions to a minimum to avoid unnecessary conflict. It was a practical approach, one that allowed us to move forward without reopening fresh wounds. Despite the sadness, there was a sense of progress, a feeling that we were both heading towards a new beginning. One afternoon, as I was boxing up the last of my things, I came across our wedding album. I hesitated, then opened it, flipping through the pages. Each photograph was a snapshot of a time when we were blissfully unaware of the future heartbreak. I lingered on one picture in particular, the one of us cutting the cake, our smiles wide and genuine. I closed the album, setting it aside. There was no point in dwelling on the past. We had made our choices, and now we had to live with them. I reminded myself that this was part of the healing process, a necessary step towards finding closure and peace. One day, while clearing out the attic, I stumbled upon a dusty box filled with old letters and keepsakes. Among them was a letter from Emily, written years ago during a brief separation we had experienced early in our marriage. Her words were filled with love and promises, a testament to the bond we once shared. Reading it brought a bittersweet smile to my face. It reminded me that despite everything, there had been genuine love and happiness between us. That love had been real, and it was important to honor those memories even as we moved on. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly smooth. Emily and I were both committed to making the process as painless as possible. We signed the papers with a shared sense of finality, the act both liberating and heartbreaking. The realization that our marriage was officially over was a heavy weight, but also a necessary step towards healing. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild my life. I focused on my work, channeling my energy into my career and finding solace in the routine. I started seeing a therapist, someone who helped me navigate the complex emotions and lingering pain from the betrayal. The sessions were cathartic, providing me with the tools to process my feelings and begin to let go of the anger. Emily and I kept our interactions brief and cordial. We occasionally exchanged updates about mutual friends or necessary logistics, but there was a clear distance between us. It was for the best. We both needed time to heal independently, to rediscover who we were outside of our relationship. Robert's downfall was another part of the resolution. The company made a public statement about his dismissal, citing his inappropriate conduct and unethical behavior. There was a certain grim satisfaction in seeing him brought to justice, but it didn't erase the pain he had caused. It was merely a step towards closure, a way to ensure he wouldn't hurt others as he had hurt me. One evening, while walking Max in the park, I ran into Marcus. We hadn't seen each other since the day I asked for his help, and it was good to catch up. He asked how I was doing, and I found myself being honest in a way that felt refreshing. "I'm getting there," I said, watching Max chase a squirrel. "It's been tough, but I think I'm finally starting to heal." Marcus nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "You've been through a lot, Jack. Just take it one day at a time." Our conversation was a reminder of the support I had around me, friends who cared and were willing to stand by me through thick and thin. It was a comfort, knowing I wasn't alone in this journey. As time went on, I began to reconnect with old hobbies and interests. I joined a local book club, started taking cooking classes, and even picked up running again. Each new activity was a small victory, a step towards reclaiming my sense of self and finding joy in the little things. Emily and I eventually met one last time to finalize the sale of the house. It was a brief meeting, but it carried a sense of closure. We exchanged a few words, wished each other well, and then went our separate ways. It was a quiet end to a tumultuous chapter, but it felt right. The sale of the house brought with it a final sense of resolution. With the proceeds, I was able to buy a new place, a small but cozy apartment that felt like a fresh start. As I settled in, I began to decorate it with pieces that reflected who I was now, a blend of old and new that symbolized my journey forward. In the quiet moments, I still thought about what had happened, the pain and betrayal that had defined the past year. But those thoughts were no longer all-consuming. They were part of my story, but not the whole of it. I had come to accept that healing was a gradual process, one that required patience and self-compassion. As I looked around my new home, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the end I had envisioned, but it was a new beginning, one filled with possibilities. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to rebuild, to create a life that was truly my own. And in that moment, I realized that while the journey had been painful, it had also been transformative. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, resilience that had carried me through the darkest days. And as I stood there, looking out at the horizon, I felt hopeful for the first time in a long while. The first few weeks in my new apartment were a whirlwind of adjustments and self-discovery. The space was smaller than our old house, but it felt right, cozy, in a way that allowed me to breathe and focus on rebuilding my life from the ground up. There was something liberating about starting over, about creating a space that was entirely mine. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the routine and the challenges it presented. Without Robert's oppressive presence, the office atmosphere improved dramatically. I was promoted to his old position, a move that was both a vindication and a daunting responsibility. But I embraced it, channeling my energy into making positive changes and proving to myself that I was capable of thriving on my own. Outside of work, I began to explore new hobbies and interests, reclaiming parts of myself that had been neglected during my marriage. The local book club became a weekly highlight. I met people who shared my love for literature and found engaging discussions that helped me escape from the remnants of my past. My cooking classes were another unexpected joy, a way to experiment and create, to bring new flavors and experiences into my life. Running became a form of therapy. Each morning, I would lace up my shoes and hit the trails, Max bounding along beside me. The physical exertion was a way to clear my mind, to process my thoughts and emotions. I found a rhythm, a sense of peace in the steady beat of my footsteps and the natural beauty around me. Emily and I maintained a cordial distance. We were no longer a part of each other's daily lives, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. She had moved on, focusing on her own journey of self-discovery and healing. Occasionally, we would exchange brief messages, checking in to ensure the other was doing well. It was strange, but there was a certain comfort in knowing that we could still care for each other's well-being, even from afar. One weekend, I decided to attend a local music festival. It was something I had always wanted to do, but had never found the time for. As I wandered through the crowds, listening to various bands and soaking in the vibrant atmosphere, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. It was there that I met Rachel. She was standing near one of the food trucks, struggling to balance a tray of tacos and a drink. I offered to help, and we struck up a conversation. She was warm, funny, and incredibly easy to talk to. We spent the rest of the day together, exploring the festival and discovering shared interests. Rachel was a graphic designer, passionate about art and creativity. She had a zest for life that was infectious, and I found myself drawn to her energy and positivity. We exchanged numbers at the end of the day, promising to meet up again soon. Our first date was at a small art gallery downtown. We spent hours discussing the exhibits, our conversation flowing effortlessly. It was refreshing to connect with someone new, to share stories and experiences without the weight of past baggage. Rachel's presence was a light in the darkness, a reminder that there was still joy to be found in the world. As we grew closer, I found myself opening up about my past. I told her about Emily, about the betrayal and the pain it had caused. Rachel listened with empathy and understanding, never judging or prying. She shared her own experiences, her own struggles and triumphs, and we found a mutual respect and connection that felt genuine and real. In time, Rachel and I became a couple. Our relationship was built on trust and honesty, a foundation that felt solid and secure. We supported each other's dreams and ambitions, finding a balance that allowed us to grow both individually and together. My journey of healing continued, but it was no longer solitary. Rachel became a source of strength and inspiration, her presence a comforting reminder that life could be beautiful again. We traveled together, explored new places, and created memories that were untainted by the shadows of the past. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me to a place of peace and happiness. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and I was proud of the person I had become. Rachel turned to me, her eyes reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. "You seem happy," she said, her voice soft and warm. "I am," I replied, taking her hand in mine. "I never thought I could feel this way again. But here I am, and it's because of you." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "You've come a long way, Jack, and I'm so glad I get to be a part of this journey with you." As we sat there, watching the day turn into night, I realized how far I had come. The betrayal that had once defined my life was now just a chapter in my story, a part of my past that had led me to where I was meant to be. I had found strength in my darkest moments, and now I was ready to embrace the future with open arms. The journey wasn't over, but I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. With Rachel by my side, and the lessons I had learned guiding me, I knew that I could face anything. The pain had transformed into resilience, the heartbreak into hope, and as I looked towards the horizon, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the new life I had built, a life filled with love, joy, and endless possibilities.